Okay, looks like we have just about our full audience on now. Just a second to jump on. All right, everybody, it's about 7 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight for our GBBO webinar presentation on Motus. My name is Kayla Henry. I am an outreach coordinator here with Great Basin Bird Observatory. I have a feeling most of you are familiar with our work who are attending this tonight, but just in case, we are a nonprofit based in Reno, Nevada, dedicated to the conservation of birds through research, partnerships, and education. And tonight we're going to learn about Motus, a collaborative wildlife tracking technology. This will be a multifaceted discussion with presentations about the cutting edge technology of Motus and how it relates to migration science, outreach, and education, as well as birds here in Nevada. We will have time for questions after all of the presentations have concluded, so we will save all questions towards the end. Please direct any questions to the chat feature, or you can raise your hand using the icon at the bottom of your screen. This presentation will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I'll hand it over to Kelly Colegrove, our project manager here with GBBO, to give us a little bit of an introduction and some background on Motus.
Okay. Can you see my screen all right? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. So as Kayla said, my name is Kelly Colegrove. I'm a project manager here at Great Basin Bird Observatory, and I've been involved in a lot of the Motus coordination in Nevada and in the West. So I'm going to give just a little bit of background on Motus and what it is. Okay, so what is Motus? It is an international collaborative research network using automated radio telemetry to track wildlife. And if you've ever seen a Motus presentation or webinar, you've probably heard that phrase a few times, but that is what it is. So it was initiated and is currently managed by Bird Studies Canada to facilitate landscape scale research and education on the ecology and conservation of migrating animals. It's since expanded to answer a broader array of research questions on movement. And before you try to figure out what Motus stands for, it's not an acronym. The name came from the Latin word for motion or movement. All right, so radio telemetry is not a new technology. It's been used to track the movements of birds and other wildlife for decades. A unique transmitter is attached to an animal, and that transmitter emits a constant radio signal, which can be picked up by an antenna and a receiver and then used to locate and track an animal's movements. This photo gives an example of an antenna, a directional antenna called a Yagi antenna, and receiver that was used to study and track pinyon jay locations by GBBO. Depending on the goals of a study, this method can be really labor intensive and requires a surveyor to remain relatively close to a bird. Another popular method of tracking wildlife utilizes GPS and satellites, which offers a really great, offers excellent locational information and can span great distances, but the transmitters at this time are still really heavy, and so they're too big for most smaller species. Motus, however, uses automated radio telemetry, which means the receiver stations remain in a fixed location. When a bird or other wildlife comes within a given proximity of the station, the location and time is recorded for each unique tag on an individual. Spatial and temporal records will be documented for as long as the transmitter is near the station. So if a bird flies over once during migration, it'll just record one little blip. But if it's hanging around for a few days, it'll continue to receive that information. Each station covers a radius of about 10 to 15 miles, but this is quite variable and largely depends on the terrain and other obstructions. So it needs to be strategically placed in areas with high elevation and a clear line of sight. GIS viewshed analysis has been crucial to station site selection and then giving an idea of how many stations you might need to cover a given area. All right, so one station can inform you of the information of presence of an animal, but when you have multiple stations collecting data, this can really paint a picture of the movement of that animal. This image shows an array of stations used for the study of bat movements around Lake Erie. You can see they have pretty good coverage over the entire area of Ontario between the Great Lakes. All right, so that explains what automated radio telemetry is, but like the super cool thing about Motus is that it creates this whole network of researchers across the globe that are all contributing to this knowledge of wildlife movement that spans countries and even continents. Instead of a bunch of little disparate studies working to answer a specific set of questions, by unifying the methods of data collection, the Motus network allows for huge amounts of data to be collected across vast distances. All the data is centralized in a master database, which is managed by Bird Studies Canada, where it is archived, visualized, and distributed to researchers and the general public. There are currently 1,278 stations over 30 countries, most of which are in the Americas, but the network is quickly expanding. Over 30,000 individuals have been tagged, representing over 264 species. So the original vision of Motus was geared towards birds and bird migration, but it has since been useful in the study of bats and other large insects. I also recently heard of a study of some research being done with caching and seed dispersal, and they were putting tags in acorns and seeing where they were distributed across the landscape. So there are a lot of good ideas coming out of Motus, and people are getting really creative with the technology. All right, so here you can see how the network in the United States and Canada has provided some insights into the migration patterns of red knots. This is just a snapshot of a video that you can watch on motus.org, and I really encourage you to do that and other tracks available because it's really cool to see the movement of these different species over different years and seeing the different paths they take. And you can see how this is really covering a pretty large area. Motus stations along the Gulf of Mexico, northeastern United States, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Quebec all added to this information. And that would be really difficult to do for a single survey or even a single group of surveyors. There really are so many ways that Motus can be utilized, either to gather information on species or locations that are currently understudied, or to see how the information we currently do have might be changing as our landscape continues to shift with climate change. Motus offers an opportunity to understand full cycle habitat use by birds, so winter habitat and breeding habitat, along with migration, which is hugely needed by so many species. You can get an idea of post-breeding dispersal and survival, and also population connectivity on a larger scale. Information on migration, such as chosen pathways, timing of arrival and departure, stopover duration, and then migration hotspots can be found, which can really help inform conservation and management. And then because all of this information is open to the public, Motus offers a really great opportunity for education and community science, which Ned will talk about in more detail during his presentation. So one example of a Motus project is the tricolored blackbird study done along the Kern River by Mary Whitfield and others from the Southern Sierra Research Station. This is one of the first projects established in the West and is kind of considered a flagship project, and Mary's been instrumental in a lot of the work done in the West. At least 78 birds were fitted with nanotags in the area with at least 2 separate colonies to track movements that provided information on whether the populations they were looking at were year-round residents or if they were migrating, and how they're using breeding sites, and then connectivity between different colonies. And then all of the data from this pilot study is available online, and you can see on the Motus website, you can get all that information and see what birds were detected where and how often they were detected. Here's another example of a project using Motus focused on barn swallows. This infographic was available on the Motus website, where there are so many great resources that you can use for education and just to get a better idea about Motus. Barn swallow populations have also been declining, and so using Motus, researchers measured post-fledgling survival to try to understand age-specific mortality rates. They found that only 42% of birds survived this period. And they were also able to gather additional information, such as nest condition and timing of fledging, to see how they impacted survival. So the more information we get pinpointing why these species are declining, the more likely something can be done about it. So I know this is all very exciting, but there is the minor issue of needing to build up this network for it to be truly useful. There are two basic ways to expand the network. There's sort of a bottom-up approach, which utilizes, individual studies to eventually populate the area and a region. And then a top-down approach, which identifies areas where we think we need coverage and putting stations in there. In general, I think a hybrid approach is being used across the board. But either way, no matter how it's being used, this requires a lot of coordination. So regional coordination groups have been formed mostly organically to meet regularly. This allows them to discuss new projects, kind of how things are going, troubleshooting different hurdles. This is all relatively new technology, so there's still a fair amount to talk about, and also just bounce ideas off of each other and see how things are going in other areas. And these conversations are also really useful to help minimize duplication in efforts, identify gaps in coverage, and they can be very useful in leveraging funding sources, especially larger sources like competitive state wildlife grants. All right, for example, the Northeast Motus collaboration has been really successful in expanding their network over the past few years. This isn't all the towers there, but these are just some towers they put in that were identified for more of that top-down approach, where they thought they were high priority for the region. This includes a line of stations that go across the site that theoretically would catch any bird or any species, I keep saying bird, but birds, bats, insects, that might be passing across the state. They also did a study to identify migration hotspots and put towers in there to make sure they had good coverage. All right, so the Western Motus network encompasses the Pacific Flyway and is broken into a few regional coordination groups. As you can see, until very recently, the West had few Motus stations. Before 2017, there were almost none at all. The Pacific Northwest and California have been active over the past few years, but there's still a lot of gaps in coverage, and we have to do a lot more to expand the network. All right, so in 2018, Partners in Flight Western Working Group created a Motus committee, which is chaired by Mary Whitfield. The goal was to sort of study post-breeding movement and migration information, especially identifying important stopover sites, which is critical to the conservation of many species in need. The group put out a prospectus identifying short and long-term goals, which Kevin will discuss in a little more detail in his presentation. So here in the Southwest, there have been a number of towers installed in California. I mentioned the Southern Sierra Research Station towers studying tricolored blackbirds, but there have also been a lot of collaborations between bird observatories, Audubon, and the Nature Conservancy around the San Francisco Bay Area. And then over the summer, a Fish and Wildlife Service intern made it her focus point to try to reach out to potential partners and identify high priority species, which is going to pave the way for a lot of coordination efforts in the future. The station at Desert National Wildlife Refuge was the first one put up in Nevada, and since then there have been 6 others that went up in eastern Nevada to study primarily bats, but I do think those stations are temporary. So moving forward, we have a lot of gaps in coverage that need to be addressed, and we're working on getting in new stations and of course capturing and tagging birds. All right, so that's sort of my overview of Motus. Thanks to everyone for listening, and thanks to all the other organizations that have already put this information out there. None of this is new. This is all available on websites and in other webinars and meetings, and here are a couple resources that you might find interesting. So with that, I will turn it over to Kevin for his presentation on Motus in Nevada.
Thanks, Kelly. Just a quick reminder for anyone just joining us, we are saving all questions until the end of the webinar. So after the last presentation, we'll have some time. Yeah, let's get started with Wildlife Refuge Manager, Kevin DesRoberts.
All right, Kyla, so can I just share my screen now? Perfect, okay. All right. Can folks see my screen yet? It is working? Okay, because I can't tell on my end.
Yes, looks
Yep,
good.
we can see you, Kevin. It's just not full screen.
All right, excellent. Okay. All right, thank you, Kelly. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Yeah, I'm just going to focus on the efforts that are underway with installing Motus tracking systems in Nevada, as Kelly talked about, and some of the progress we've made this past year. So let me move to my slideshow. All right, there we go. Hope that everybody can see that. Looks okay. All right, so basically our focus in Nevada is being driven by the Western Working Group of Partners in Flight, that initiative that's underway to establish a Western Motus network that Kelly mentioned. So basically this is a network that will include the Western provinces and territories in Canada, 11 Western states of the United States, southward through Western states of Mexico, and the Pacific slope regions of Central and South America. So a very extensive network. It'll be made up of a lot of collaborators and researchers. So the placement of individual stations will be determined by independent research goals, but also the working group is focusing on making sure whenever possible, those stations can also contribute to broad scale objectives, especially when it comes to migratory birds, land birds and shorebirds. So areas of study that are needed for most land birds and shorebirds, and these are associated with the life cycle needs that Kelly mentioned during her presentation. That includes regional and site level stopover and migrant fidelity. You know, which sites are birds using throughout their migration, and is there fidelity? Are they using the same sites over and over, year after year, or is it changing? And then what is the duration of those stopovers that species are using? Arrival and departure times on the breeding grounds, breeding habitat use, and in post-fledging survival and dispersal. You know, where are the young birds going after they fledge from the nest and start migrating and moving on south? And then of course, overwinter survival. These are all very critical needs that we need to learn more about in order to ensure we can serve birds for the future. So phase one for the Western Working Group's priorities, and this is, like I said, the same thing we're following with Nevada. And this was the past couple of years, and all this has been delayed because of the pandemic. But basically, the goals were to fill critical information gaps for priority bird species. So we went through this process to identify the priority bird species for the West. And then I've highlighted some of these in green, and these are species that that use Nevada quite a bit for various life cycle needs, whether it's migration, breeding, wintering. So these are our focus species, and it'll include other site-specific species that other researchers might be interested in using Motus technology to track, whether it's pinion jays, phainopepla, whatever those species might be. Those also be occurring in the state. And then also to expand the partnership to include bats and other wildlife. So in phase two, which is the next 5 years, basically we're focused on three major knowledge gaps, and that's migratory connectivity, migratory timing and movements, and how they relate to climate and how that might be changing with climate change. You know, what habitats are species using as conditions are changing in the habitat due to the changing climate. And one of the biggest things that we've learned, especially this affects any wetland dependent species in the Intermountain West, over the last 20 years, the availability of surface water habitat has declined by 50%. And we don't really have a good handle on how that's affecting birds, especially shorebirds and other wetland dependent wildlife, and also movements on the wintering ground. What are birds doing during the wintertime? What habitats are they using? How much are they moving around, and why? Where are they going, and what is their survival? This all, this all impacts their survival. All right, now I'm going to talk a bit about Motus station deployment, just to give you a general idea of some of the options that folks are using. These are some of the typical remote type installations that we'll be looking at in Nevada, as well as more in town or structure oriented installations, but this gives you a good idea of what they can look like. Basically simple antenna arrays that are attached to a pole or attached. This one's attached to a concrete, not a concrete, but a rock face. This is a tripod. This one's just sticking in the ground. And this is very simple system with an antenna array. In the box is where the sensor station is, that basically any tags that are detected, that information is stored in this sensor station. There's a battery system with a solar power recharger. And because this is a remote system, it requires the information to be then downloaded to a laptop and then uploaded to the Motus database. Some other installations, and these are probably one of the best things to look for, is to attach it to existing facilities, especially buildings, towers, things of those nature, because it'll save money and it'll give you the height that you need. As Kelly mentioned, you want to have these things high enough so they can reach out far enough to detect the tags as birds are coming through. Optimum is about 30 feet, but it could be more or less depending on your topography. And this middle antenna array is the one that's on top of the maintenance building on Desert Wildlife Refuge at Corn Creek, which I'll show some more pictures later. And in technology, what are these tags that researchers are using to track these birds, track these bats? And two of the tags that are out there are manufactured by low-tech wireless and then also cellular tracking technologies. Low-tech nano tags are the lower frequency tags, and the weights are between 0.15 and 3.0 grams, and that weight is very important because the size of your animal, whether it's a bird, a bat, a butterfly, is going to determine how much weight they can handle when it comes to a radio tag or transmitter, because you got to make sure the weight does not interfere with their mobility and their ability to survive and be able to live. And then the cellular tracking technologies, there's two options. There's power tags, which are battery operated, and there's also life tags, which are solar powered. And low tech now has solar tags as well. So you can use these two different types of tags depending on the birds or species that you're tracking, and it gives you a lot of flexibility in what you can put out there and what you can learn what these birds are doing. So and accomplish your research project goals. So the Western Working Group is recommending building hybrid Motus stations, and this is what we're focusing on in Nevada where we can. And those are sensor stations that detect both the high frequency and low frequency tags. And that's, I'll show you another example of that sensor station. And then with data uploading to Motus, this is something that we're really paying attention to, because Nevada is a very remote state. There's a lot of areas that don't have cellular connection or access to Wi-Fi. So a lot of these stations might be pretty remote and have to be manually maintained and the information downloaded. As I mentioned, the best connection is to have an Ethernet internet connection, Wi-Fi, and also you can do it through cellular, through T-Mobile, and then also manual through downloading information directly to a flash drive and then uploading to Motus. And just give you some examples of what these nano tags look like, battery powered, as well as some of the solar power, just tiny solar panels on some of these tiny transmitters. Pretty impressive, vary in weight and the way they can be attached to different species. It varies quite a bit. And depending on the species, I'll use birds for an example. A couple methods that researchers are using are a harness type of attachment, which goes around the shoulders, around the wings. Also, there's a leg loop type of harness that's used on some species that are smaller. And then they also can be glued on or sutured on. Just depends on the species and how long you want that transmitter to stay on that bird. So let's talk about the station installations in Nevada. This past year, the Nevada Partners in Flight group has formed a Motus committee, and Kelly Colegrove and I have been kind of co-coordinating that committee to get that started and off the ground, to see what we can do in Nevada and get things started. So, and we're focusing on both the local and the regional research needs throughout the entire state in both birds and bats right now. And as Kelly mentioned, we had a lot of help this last year. We had a director's fellow student that worked for the Migratory Birds Office of Fish and Wildlife Service, who was able to do a lot of outreach for us, contact a lot of people and find out, number one, what do they know about Motus? How interested they are in Motus tracking systems, and for what species and for what needs that might be out there. So that helped us quite a bit this past year. And also potential applications for education, which I know Ned is going to talk about next. And then, so we started that statewide coordination, and also started looking at opportunities for funding. If we go towards a statewide initiative, how can we tap into some resources to pay for putting some of these stations in? Because depending on where they're located, the cost is fairly reasonable. It can be anywhere from $600 or $700 to $3,000 for a station, depending on how you install them and what you attach them to. And then our next phase or step for going into next year is really developing a strategic plan for Nevada for the future. How do we want to plan for Motus station deployments in Nevada in the future? So I'm going to talk about some Motus station installations on the wildlife refuges in Nevada. As Kelly mentioned, we installed one on Desert, and they're also being planned for Ash Meadows, Moapa Valley, and Paranagit wildlife refuges this winter. And also Ruby Lake Refuge and Stillwater Refuge up in central and northern Nevada are interested as well. And I think if I can do this, I don't know if I can get there. Bear with me. I was going to try to go onto the Motus website. I don't know if I can do it or not. Let's see. Oh, that's my next slide. So anyway, instead I will wait to the end, and I'll just jump on the Motus website because I think that'll be easier. I want to give you a sense of where these other sites will be located in southern Nevada. Right down here where my cursor is, this is Las Vegas. This is the Desert station right here, located at Corn Creek. And we've got plans to put one up here at Moapa Valley Wildlife Refuge, which is near Glendale. And then up at Paranagit, we're looking at putting in 2 stations because there's a ridge between the visitor center wetland area to the refuge to the south, to the upper lake to the north. So we're going to be looking at putting 2 different stations up there. And then over at the eastern side near the state boundary at Ash Meadows Wildlife Refuge. And just to give you a little snapshot of what the station looks like at Desert. So this is the antenna array that was attached to the roof of the shop. These are the low frequency Yagi antennas that point in 4 different directions. And this is the omni antenna for the CTT, or the high frequency tags. And then all the cabling runs into a box that houses the sensor station, which is here on the right top of the screen. So this is where any tags that are detected will come into that sensor station, and then we've got connections that are directly through the internet. And then the information is uploaded automatically to the Motus network. And what Motus does, since these systems can receive a lot of different radio frequencies, the Motus uses an algorithm to basically go through all the radio data that's collected, all the signal data that's collected, to tease out those frequencies that are just associated with nanotags. And that's all done by Motus. And then also we install, these are called nodes that you can deploy. These are like mini receivers that you can install throughout the habitat within, has to be line of sight of the receiver station. And what these nodes do, they're able to record accurate detections of tags, whereas the main station will only pick up tags anywhere where they're received. It doesn't give you exact location of where those tags are in the area. And these nodes can give you, especially if you put several of them out, they can give you a better idea, because if you have 4 or 5 nodes that are also picking up those tags, they can triangulate the location for those tags, and which gives you a much better idea of the habitat use of that species. And then in this lower right, this is what we did is we tagged, we tested the stations, which was very, very critical. Volunteer Gene Tinsman and I walked around basically with a low-tech tag and a CT tag to make sure the station was picking up these tags throughout the habitat area we were checking. And we had no problem with reception well out to 4 miles and beyond. So it's pretty impressive, the range of these stations. And then also similar to what Kelly shared, here's some good websites to check out to get more information about Motus. I encourage everyone to hit the Motus website. There's so much information on there. I'm by far not an expert, still learning a lot. And there's a lot to learn about these technologies and what you can do with them to do research. And one thing I want to mention, a couple key things with getting our stations installed in Nevada, we've been very, very fortunate that we've had 2 wonderful volunteers, Mark and Joyce, who are really technically savvy and construction savvy and have done an incredible job, putting up the station on desert, and they're going to be installing the other stations on the other refuges over the next couple months. So we've been very fortunate, and they're a good reference too. I know Mark is happy to talk to anybody about installing these systems, so he's a good resource. So I'm going to end my slideshow, and I'm going to jump on the web really quick if I have time. Do I have time, Kayla?
Yep, you have time.
Super. All right, so I'm on the Motus website. If you go there, it's motus.org, and you'll see this first map that's brought up. If you want to see what stations are active right now, you want to click on this View Larger Map with additional options here. And then we'll zoom in to Nevada. And you'll see a picture very similar to what Kelly shared. It just shows you the stations that are in the area in the West, which still is more, but still not that many yet compared to other states. So if you zoom in, you can actually, you can click on the individual station. So this is the one for desert. You can click on it, and it brings up information about that station, what the project is, who the contact is, receiver, and also a map of the coverage area, which is really kind of cool. So I'm going to click on that, and gives you a really good location of what this looks like on the ground. So this is Corn Creek on Desert Wildlife Refuge, and you can see this is the antenna array for the UHF antennas, the low frequency antennas, and this inner one is the CTT antenna. And the reason why there's only 3 lobes of coverage showing is that we had to turn off this lobe that pointed towards Las Vegas because there was way too much radio disturbance. But since then, they've come out with a signal buffer, a radio buffer that Mark has ordered. And once we install that, we'll be able to activate this this lobe again. But you can see that the distance is tremendous. So from Corn Creek, from the station to the Highway 95, that's 4 miles away. So if this detection range is all the way out to the end of this lobe, you're looking at about 15 miles. And it's pretty impressive, but also depends on that topography. You got mountains here, so may not be detected over here, but out in this flat country and then down here, tags will easily be detected. So just gives you an idea. And also more information about the station. If you click on the project, it brings up more information about that station, a description of the entire project, and then a table for that receiver. So you can, this shows you the receiver was deployed on March 27th, 2021. And so far we haven't detected any tags. And that's not surprising at all because very few people are tagging birds that are moving through Nevada right now. And that'll change over time as we start tagging birds and as a lot of our researchers and cooperators start tagging birds. So I'm going to go back out and see, let's see if I got time to do one more. I want to zoom into one of the other stations up near Ely, because this is also really cool. You click on one of those, and you can see this is a project by Jason Williams with Nevada Department of Wildlife. And similar to the other receivers, it gives you a map of the array that he installed for that station. And also what it's for. So what's nice, it shows you the whole project. So he's got 7 receivers out. He's deployed 49 tags, 30 of them on Townsend's big-eared bats. And 19, I'm not sure what that means, if they're unknown species or he just didn't write them down, but it gives you a lot of really cool information. Here's all the receivers and then the tags that are detected by those receivers. So pretty cool stuff, and you can do that on any of the stations throughout the network, throughout the world. Because as Kelly mentioned, what's really cool about Motus is this information is public. So it enables a lot of people to learn about how species are moving around on the planet, which helps all of us learn about conservation of these species. Where, in the past or in other projects, researchers typically are the ones that have access to that data. If they're using GPS collars or other telemetry, if it's not accessible to the public, they are the only ones that see it, and no one else can really gain from that until that's published. So this is much more easy for a lot of folks to use. And I think that's it for my presentation. All right, so thank you.
Kevin. Next, we are going to turn it over to our project biologist and fellow outreach coordinator, Ned Bohman with GBBO for the final presentation of the night on Motus in schools.
Thanks, Kayla. Hopefully you can all see me and my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Good. All right, so thanks, Kayla. Kevin and Kelly talked about what Motus is and why it's so valuable as a research tool. And so we talked about the power of it being in the number of towers out there, the area they cover, and the more the better. So it's important to convince everyone of this value and to show that it's not just for researchers. So I want to talk a little bit about the outreach and education tie-ins and why every school should have its own Motus tower. It's got incredible potential as a very powerful resource for both students and educators. By incorporating access to Motus data with lesson plans, educators can create in-depth and meaningful learning exercises and then tie in that importance with real-world data, because as Kevin and Kelly both said, it's so cool that this data is freely and publicly available. So in addition to being just plain fascinating and valuable in a general sense, it can address regionally mandated curriculum objectives for students in the US and Canada. It can be an element of STEM learning and generally connect students to the natural world, ecological processes, and bird migration, which is even more important now as young folks are increasingly disconnected from the natural world. Because of all this, Motus provides many opportunities for project-based learning exercises, in-depth case studies, and so that photo there is some kids at the Bernheim Arboretum and Forest Trust, which is Kentucky's first Motus tower installation, and they are getting to see a yellow-breasted chat there. So that's a screenshot there of what it looks like. Well, you saw from Kevin's show what it looks like when you log into Motus to look up data, and you can filter by species and projects. But so kids have always been able to visit banding stations and that kind of thing, to see what researchers do firsthand. But with this large data set accumulated by Motus towers being freely and easily accessible, it just makes it makes it that much more powerful by tying those two things together to really see, what they're hearing about in their lesson plans versus they can actually see it right in front of them. Like this data was collected locally by the towers. And there's many ways to involve students in migration and Motus tech, and I'll cover that in a minute. But But really that link is just so important. Like bird migration, its global nature, the threats faced by migratory species are important lessons to teach. And with the real world data so easily accessible, that connection is just that much stronger. And also, like Kelly said in her show, this is another screenshot of what it looks like when you look up some Motus data. I just punched in gray-cheeked thrush here, and they're animated when you log in, and it's really cool. And you should all log on to motus.org and look up species and check out the map animations because it's really neat. But my slideshow is not that fancy. But you can see birds where they were caught. You can zoom in on the satellite imagery to see what it looks like there, get a feel for why they ended up there, if there were other birds using that area, if they were by themselves. It's really neat. And there's a number of resources on motus.org that Bird Studies Canada have put together. They've sort of made this like a streamlined curriculum where they start with offering these virtual field trips to their Long Point Bird Observatory, and the specific dates and online registration are on their website. But they also have this interactive presentation that students can complete on their own, and that just sort of discusses bird migration and the conservation issues related to it. So those are sort of designed to be used before their next tools, the case studies, the data exploration tools. So once they've talked about migration, established context for the conservation issues, they can move on to these species-specific case studies and developing their own questions about bird migration. And Kelly also showed you a photo of the barn swallow case study, but this is another part of that. My screenshot couldn't cover the whole thing, but this is put together with Motus data. And that's the case studies and these data exploration tools are really the most relevant part for the classroom in my mind. It's again just bringing home that real life application about what you're telling the students, but this you can actually show them. And the way Motus presents the data, it can hopefully empower, but at least enable students to put together their own questions and exposés and case studies. So this is an example of a student activity. This is another screenshot from motus.org. And it's just sort of an assignment that students can complete using all of the map points that are listed below. And again, my screenshot couldn't cover it all, but there's a ton of map points there, and students can use those to complete the numbered assignments. And I know I keep talking about students in classrooms, and that's sort of a lot of the most interesting stuff here, but anyone can take advantage of these. Anyone can host a Motus tower. Any Audubon chapter, anyone who's anyone can put up a tower and look at the data, and just seeing locally collected data is just really cool. But this is what one class did. These are 12th grade students in Westchester, Pennsylvania, on the East Coast with their well-established network. This was just a very neat, multifaceted project where they followed that curriculum. They did they didn't do the virtual field trip. They visited a local observatory, but they did that interactive presentation, and then they visited their local banding station. I think it was the Willistown Conservation Trust, but where they got to meet researchers, see what researchers do, see the tags being deployed, meet researchers for future connections. So they started there. And then after they had made a bunch of visits to that banding station, they got to visit the actual tower installation that was on their school's campus. And they also got to navigate the database and see data points being collected by that tower, but they also got to talk to the local expert who had helped install that tower to just see all these pieces of the conservation puzzle fitting together. And then after they had this visit, they put together presentations to cover all that material that they were learning. Another example, also from Pennsylvania. This was I didn't write down what school. These were 8th grade students. looking at wood thrushes, which, as so many songbirds are, wood thrushes are experiencing steep population declines range-wide, but are steepest in Pennsylvania. So students again visited the Willistown Conservation Trust. They spoke with researchers, or were presented to by researchers, about the plight of their wood thrush. And they were assigned to read this book, Flute's Journey, which, if you could have guessed, is about an individual's bird's trials and tribulations on migration. And also at the trust there, they were walked through the database and shown data points from locally collected birds. So after that, the students were tasked with a few simple things, just like plotting bird locations on a map, labeling the wintering versus breeding locations, connecting data points to visualize the routes bird took for the spring and fall migration. And after producing the maps, they had an assignment similar to the one I showed a few slides ago, where they were answering questions about longest stopover, longest distance between stops, total distance, etc. Teachers then talked about Partners in Flight's 7 simple actions, which, if you're not familiar, it's a really cool thing, just an inspiring way for everyone to get involved in their everyday lives with bird conservation. But along those lines, the teachers asked their students to put together posters, skits, other media reflecting what they learned. And I thought that was a really neat way to have them present that material, sort of geared to presenting to the public as opposed to academic presentations. So yeah, it's an incredibly powerful tool. Does that photo look familiar? I think it was on Kelly's show. It's an incredibly powerful tool to get at some of the biggest mysteries in bird science and figuring out where birds go. And the research applications are nearly endless. The bigger the network grows, the more powerful it becomes. The education applications are an important piece of this because of the additional benefits to students. And like I briefly mentioned before, they don't have to be restricted to school students. A lot of Audubon chapters, for example, are hosting their own towers and are spearheading local campaigns to get more people excited about this. And again, the point I want to emphasize is that they have value to more than just researchers. And the more people get excited about it, the more powerful our ability to answer these questions and these mysteries becomes. So thanks. And we are happy to take questions now.
Thanks, Ned. All right, looks like we did have one question come in. And this question, I believe, was for Kevin. Read it off real quick. Okay, so Jesse Brown asks, have you approached the UNR Bureau of Miners Seismolab folks who run the wildfire detection cameras to see if you can put receivers up on those? I know their program manager and could help with connecting. I guess anyone.
I don't think so. That is
Okay.
a new one to me. Can you read? That's in the chat because I've not heard of
Yeah,
that before.
sorry. This was I can put this in the chat too for you guys. And this one, it came in during your presentation, but I feel like it might be kind of a general question to everyone. I don't know if you can see that in the chat now.
Okay. No, that'd be great. Yeah, any assistance you can provide in connecting us, that'd be awesome. Yeah, because we're looking for opportunities, because I have no idea where they have those detection cameras set up, how those are deployed throughout the state, but there might be a possibility there. Yeah.
Great. Next question is from Stacy. Says, are there studies evaluating the effects of the tags on the birds or other species? Does it impact their survival? I think this is just a general question for whoever would like to answer.
I'm not sure if there is specific or one specific to Motus, but they have done a lot of studies in the past on tags in general. Obviously, the technology is changing over time, so I don't know how relevant those are, but as the technology gets smaller, the tags are going to have less of an impact, but that certainly is a concern to be taken under consideration.
Okay, we have one more question from Brent Thompson. It says, to be allowed to tag birds, do you need to amend banding permit to allow the use of auxiliary markers, or are the tags not considered auxiliary markers?
Yes, you do need additional authorization from the bird banding lab. Yep. Yeah, in fact, we're starting to draft one of those proposals right now to be able to attach the nano tags to different species here in southern Nevada. So yeah, it requires a separate approval when you take that step. And even if you have a banding permit, because we already have a banding permit for numerous species, passerines and waterfowl and other species, but in order to attach anything to birds, you have to submit that proposal and get it approved by the bird banding lab. Yep.
Awesome. These are all been great questions so far. I don't have anything else coming in.
I think there might be a couple in the chat.
In the chat. Oh, there is. Thanks. I was looking at the Q&A. All right. Oh, there's a few. Okay. Next question. How do you protect against vandalism considering visibility in Nevada?
That is definitely going to be a challenge and something we're concerned about. That's why it's best to have the stations located on a facility where there's people around it. But of course, with the remote stations, that's where you have the greatest risk for vandalism. Or if it's close to a road where people are driving by and can probably shoot at it or throw something at it, there's potential there. But yeah, the key is to have it in as secure location as possible. So it can be monitored and to keep that risk of vandalism down. But yeah, it's definitely a concern and it has been an issue in some places. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Great question.
Next one, what is the timing or rotation of downloading for a remote station?
So with the remote stations, basically you have to physically go to it. So it depends on how often you want to go out and visit the station and download the data and put it on your laptop and then upload it to the Motus station. So, or Motus server up to their database. So it just depends on that frequency. Of course, the more often you do it, the more timely that data is going to be uploaded. So it just depends on your accessibility and the time to do it. Yeah.
Great. Let's see. This question is about funding for Motus stations at schools. So is funding up to, the question is funding at schools up to the teacher, or is there support or ideas for support from Motus?
That would be a great thing to reach out to Motus and ask about. As far as I know, there's no real large programs in place for that, but just like funding with any of these projects with expensive technology, where there's interest, there's a way to convince someone that it's worth paying you to do.
Yeah, definitely.
There's on the Motus website, there's also a webinar on sort of these outreach opportunities, and it's been a really long time since I've watched it, but I think there are some resources listed on there that might be valuable to check into.
Okay. This question starts with COVID. Since COVID has impacted landing station contacts, it says, I imagine it would be best by virtual field trips. Are those good experiences? So I guess asking if there's a way to do a virtual field trip to a Motus station.
You know, I've never done one. I know that, like I mentioned in my presentation, they do offer those virtual field trips to their Long Point Bird Observatory. I imagine that you know, in these times of COVID, that something is better than nothing. But I can't say I haven't actually attended a virtual field trip. But I imagine that since they're promoting it on their website, that it's a fairly popular experience.
Let's see. Okay, I think we have another question coming in the Q&A. Stacy asks, if there's time, can someone explain a little bit more how the nodes provide better location info versus just the Motus tower? Does it pinpoint the precise location?
Yeah, so each node uses basically radio telemetry to locate the tag. And so when you have multiple nodes that are using telemetry to locate the tag, you can basically triangulate those directions and you get a more accurate location for that tag. And actually you can get the GPS coordinates, from what I understand. So where from the station on its own, you don't have that capability. All you have is detection capability. And the nodes, the detection distance is closer. Like I said, it's up to about 300 meters. So a tag has to be pretty close to it, but that receiver can transmit that data to the receiver, the station, from quite a distance, from several miles. So you can basically, if you wanted to set up a bunch of nodes in a patch of habitat that's 5 miles from the station, the receiver station, that would work out really well. Or if it's really close, it just depends. But yeah, it gives you that more accurate data.
Awesome, great question. Let me just make sure I haven't missed anybody in the chat here. Let's see. Oh, I did miss a question a while back. It says the West appears to be lagging behind the East in just in the number of Motus towers, I'm guessing, in general. And what do we think the reason for that is?
There are a couple reasons for that. Part of it is just that when Motus was first started, there was a large focus on the coastline, specifically the coastline out east. There's a lot of research going on and some of the shorebird populations we talked about. The other thing is the Northeast is a much smaller concentrated area. I mean, it's easier to put up towers when there are towns scattered about compared to the vastness of the West. There are fewer mountains. There are a lot of reasons. For whatever reason, there was a lot more motivation. They got a lot of, like I said, some of those competitive grants that have been able to fill in the network where we haven't yet. But part of that is just because we didn't start until recently.
Yeah, that was a great question. Let's see here. One more. Are there any other federal agencies getting involved with Motus in Nevada besides U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service? For example, National Park Service or BLM, as they manage a lot of territory throughout Nevada.
Yes, but they're really just getting started. So part of the outreach that occurred this last year included representatives from the other federal agencies. So, and we've got interest from the Park Service and Forest Service and BLM, but it hasn't gone much further yet. So we're hoping that, maybe this next year we can really help get the other agencies focused on where they might want to put stations, because I know they've got some great locations on the lands that they have to manage that would really help the network and help inform some of these species research needs throughout the state. So, but yeah, so initially, yes, they are interested, but it's just at the very beginning.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing anything else new coming in. Those are all great questions. Thanks for participating with this, guys. Let's see here. Yep, that seems to be it. So unless anyone has any closing thoughts, you can go ahead and share my.
Yeah, I would just mention, if anybody does come up with questions, Kevin and I can put our info and Ned in the chat in case you have something that comes up, just so that you can reach us.
Yeah, that'd be great. So they'll put their info in the chat. All right, well, thanks everybody for joining us this evening. This presentation will be, it was recorded and we will have it up on our YouTube channel. You can just search Great Basin Bird Observatory on YouTube and it'll come up. Definitely check out motus.org. It's a great resource. And check out our website, gbbo.org, for our upcoming events. We are hosting a bird walk on Black Friday on the 26th to opt outside. So if you're in the Reno area and feel like joining us for that, that would be great. And you can find more info on our website. All right, well, have a good night, everybody. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, thanks.
Have a good night, everybody.
Have a good night.